Why is barley so hard to grow in America?
It comes originally. I mean, it was growing over in that northern Europe area. They had much more fertile soil. When they came out here, the soil was a lot rockier and it's a lot harder to grow. Even to this day, barley is still a difficult product to grow. It's a lot more expensive as a raw material. But interestingly enough, that is, and actually I'll just go ahead and announce it too. I'm starting a second blog focused solely on American single malts. So distilleries in the United States are starting to distill barley-based whiskey, much copied after Irish and Scotch whiskey, but it's all American. And it's a very new product, something that I'm extremely interested in.
And are they going to be using like the same type of mash as the base, or are they not going to use barley?
No, they're going to use barley. It's much more specialized. You know, barley has become easier over time to grow. It's the number one ingredient in beer, but it hasn't been a big seller because, quite frankly, Scotch and Irish whiskeys, and of course, eventually Japanese whiskeys, kind of own the marketplace. More and more of the local small distillers are experimenting with it and starting to make some superb product.
I would think that if a company like Anheuser-Busch or some of these these Goliath companies were to get behind something, they could really, do something.
Well, the interesting thing is it's mostly the small distilleries that are starting to experiment with it. Basically, Anheuser-Busch will get involved once all these small guys get the product out there and people show an interest. Then those bigger companies will most likely fall in line, but it's on the forefront right now. There are I think 23 American single malts available from different distilleries. So it's in its infancy, which is one of the reasons why I'm very interested in it. It's my goal to become a product ambassador for American single malts. I love single malt whiskeys. I love malt whiskeys in general, which is why I like Scotch and Irish the best. But I'm very interested because it's homegrown. That's a common question, and the answer is trying to describe the taste of your favorite chocolate, right? They make 1,000 types of chocolate. Well, every whiskey is a little different. There are some similarities. Scottish whiskey is probably the most difficult to peg because different regions produce different styles. Now, it's become a little less so that way, but for example, there are 6 main geographic regions of Scotland. On the one hand, you have what they call Islay Scotch. That's the smoky, medicinal, peated, kind of heavily iodine, influenced by the things we think of for the sea. The definitions people use are smoke, peat, kippers, tarry rope. That's the sort of thing on one end. On the opposite end, we have very light, fruity, citric, almost wine-like whiskeys that are very light. And then another flavor profile common in Scotch whiskeys are ones that are finished in Oloroso sherry casks. They tend to be very nutty with a slight sweetness to them. Full-bodied, big tasting, lots of flavors like stewed fruits and fruitcake. I mean, it's really all over the board. Irish whiskey tends to be a little lighter. They don't use as much. They don't rarely ever use smoke to dry the barley, which is how the Scotch whiskey gets that smoky taste. Although, in fairness, a lot of Irish whiskeys, Irish distilleries are experimenting with that. So it's kind of becoming less and less simple to differentiate. But in general, again, bourbon uses corn. Corn is a naturally sweeter grain. And so the whiskeys come out with a much sweeter taste. One of the common descriptors of bourbon is that it has a cherry flavor. The cherry is developed from the sweetness in the corn and the burnt oak. Bourbon specifically has to be casked in new charred oak barrels. And it develops a very noticeable, I call it cough syrup cherry backing. Now, it varies from there, but that's one of the most common descriptors for bourbon. Rye, on the other hand, rye is a much spicier product. It has a little more oak, of an actual oak taste to it, more vegetal, but it's also very spicy. So bourbon is sweeter, rye is spicier, Scotch is usually smokier, or on the opposite end, it has the sherry kind of finish. And then Irish whiskey is similar to Scotch, but a little bit on the lighter side. It's usually distilled. They distill it further than they do Scotch. Again, it is all over the board. And to answer your question about how does somebody promote a whiskey, you really have to know the product in order to be able to explain it, because the people that you're going to be talking to are more and more sophisticated. We don't get as many people coming in anymore and saying, hey, I think I like bourbon. Can you recommend one for me? They're going to come in and say, I want a great bourbon. I want a bourbon, I want the bourbon of all bourbons. And you really need to know the product and understand what it is. If you're going to sell a whiskey, you really have to understand what is in that marketplace, who the players in that marketplace are. So it takes a little bit of prep.
Yeah, so that actually makes sense, because it's not like you're selling a $12 bottle of Sauvignon Blanc, because Scotch whiskey drinkers, they're usually going to have a bit more knowledge about what they're drinking, because if I'm not mistaken, the Scotch drinkers, I don't want to say it's like a cult, because that usually has a negative connotation, but there seems to be a loyalty. Is that right? When it comes to
that's a great way to put it. People who drink Scotch are usually more particular about what Scotch they drink, because there is such variety. People tend to have strong opinions about what they like, and as a result, tend to know more about their product than just the average person who's never had it before, for example. But I'd also say it's equal to wine, in the sense that people really start to learn what they like in wine, and they want to know that it's going to be what they want. Well, here's a great perspective. You go to the store to buy a bottle of wine, and you figure you're going to get if you're just an average wine drinker, you're going to spend $8 to $15 for a bottle of wine to get a decent wine, right? And you're not going to think too much about it. But you go to the store to buy a bottle of Scotch, and a cheap bottle of Scotch that is acceptable starts at $25 a bottle and goes up to $5,000 a bottle. You're more likely to be more involved in the choice process and making sure that what you get is what you want. I mean,
you're paying a lot more
than I am here.
Yeah, you're paying a lot more. So yeah, it makes sense. When it comes to wine, when I'm trying to determine what somebody likes, because when a lot of people don't know how to put into words what they taste or what they like. They know when they taste it, and plus, there are a lot of misconceptions. One of the questions I might ask is, well, how do you take your coffee? Oh, I like it black. Well, when I hear that, my first thought is, oh, you probably like Cabernet Sauvignon that's tannic. When it comes to whiskey, have you found there are any kind of examples like that? Like, for example, people that like lighter white wines might be more drawn to Glenlivet or lighter scotches, or, I'm just spitballing here, but I'm just trying to find some guidance for people that sell Scotch, so we have an idea of questions we can ask customers, and we could say, oh, hey, well, ma'am, what kind of whatever do you like? Oh, I like this. Oh, okay, then chances are you're going to like this type of Scotch.
Right. No, that's a great question, and it follows in line with what you're talking about with the wine. I will usually ask somebody, when you're drinking an alcoholic beverage, what do you like to drink? And you have somebody who comes and says, well, I really like margaritas. Like, that's my favorite drink. So if they like margaritas, I would think more of a more citrusy, lighter whiskey, something that probably mixes well. And whiskey is a journey. It's a journey of 1,000 tastes. Because I can tell you for myself, I went from white wine to light red wines to medium red wines to heavy red wines to chewing on oak log red wines and then to Scotch. Because I was constantly looking for that increased complexity. The journey through Scotch is similar too. You start people at whatever level they're at. If they like mixed drinks, I usually would recommend like a light blended whiskey where they can make a Rob Roy, or there's some a Rusty Nail. There's some other drinks that you can make from whiskey. If somebody comes to me and says, I like really complex red wines, I might be more likely to give them something that's finished in Oloroso sherry casks that has a nuttier, fruitier, rounder kind of flavor. If I have somebody who comes and says, yeah, I'm usually drinking Jack Daniels, well, then I'd be more likely to offer them something a little heavier in the Scotch.
Like a Talisker?
I'm sorry?
Like Talisker or Macallan, maybe?
Okay, so Macallan, that's interesting to bring those up. Talisker is a much peatier wine. It's smoky. It's a peaty, smoky Scotch. Macallan is on the opposite end. It's heavily sherry. So Macallan Scotches tend to be Oloroso sherry finished, nuttier, sweeter. Talisker is more along the lines of like Laphroaig or Lagavulin, where it's heavier on the smoke end of the flavor.
Talisker is my favorite.
Yeah, Talisker is an outstanding Scotch, and it's always been a classic. So it really depends, but I usually don't recommend smoky Scotches to people unless they're willing to give it a try. Have you ever seen the commercial for Laphroaig? If you ever get a chance to see the web commercial for people try Laphroaig for the first time, because Laphroaig is extremely smoky and medicinal, and it is not what we normally would recommend to a first-time Scotch drinker. Right. It's once you've already started your journey and you're ready to try something intense, then we recommend it. But it's a hilarious commercial, and it kind of gives you a good feel for it. I mean, some people taste it and think it tastes like iodine and ash.
So could you please just take us through, very briefly, those different styles of whiskeys we spoke of, but just give us a few of the most common brand names that we may recognize in the stores so we know what to look for if we're looking for a peaty whiskey or a lighter or a more sherried quality.
I'm going to start in the United States. If I was going to recommend a bourbon, I would recommend one of the Bullet brands. They make very high quality and unusually low priced whiskeys. Both their bourbons and their ryes are perennial award winners, and you can buy them for $20 to $25 a bottle all day long.
And are they lighter style or the medium or fuller? Or
well, yeah, they're in bourbon. There's less variety in bourbon than there is in other Scotches.
Okay.
I mean, other whiskeys. So, I mean, if you're going to try something, granted, everybody's used to the brand names like Jack Daniels, Jim Beam. Those are bourbons for the masses, and they're fine. I mean, bourbons for the masses, and they're fine for what they are. But if you really want to try something to help you understand bourbon, or something you want to recommend to somebody, Bullet is very consistent. It's a smaller manufacturer, and that's what I would always recommend. In fact, I'm not a big fan of bourbon, but I will buy Bullet because it's that good, in my humble opinion. If I was going to buy Irish whiskey, which I do from time to time, there's an area where there's a wide variety. Of course, the number one selling Irish whiskey is Jameson, and for somebody who just wants an all-around mixing whiskey, Jameson is probably your best bet. It's light, it's no intense flavors, very easy to find everywhere. In the world of Scotch, which of course I've mentioned a time or two, is my favorite arena. If you're looking for a lighter Scotch that's affordable, you can't go wrong with Chivas Regal. Chivas Regal makes a 12-year-old blended Scotch. It's a light-bodied style. It's creamy. It has some of that sherry kind of flavor, but mostly there's like hints of marshmallow, kind of a baked fruitiness to it. A very elegant and light. Same goes for Johnny Walker Black. In the blended arena, those three probably are the most common, most easily available, and very approachable and affordable.
What about Glenlivet?
Well, Glenlivet is a single malt, and that's sort of like the entry point into single malt Scotch.
Oh, so you were talking about blended Scotches there?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Scotch.
Okay.
Yeah, they're and the Chivas brothers were one of the first exporters. James Chivas was one of the first blenders. That's a whole other history story, but he was one of the first blenders of Scotch, and in the forefront in the same time frame as John Walker, Johnny Walker, Usher, that's another brand. So yeah, Chivas Regal is a classic blended Scotch.
Okay, so those are blended Scotches you went into. Okay, good. All right, so I interrupt you. So yeah, please proceed with.
No, that's okay. Yeah. So if we're going to talk about single malt Scotches, Glenlivet is a very good entry Scotch. Affordable, lighter bodied, doesn't require a whole lot of thought to drink it. It's a very good Scotch. It's been around forever. It's available almost everywhere. Again, and it's a great starting point Scotch. Glenlivet is an example of one. Glenfiddich is an example. These are Highland Scotches. Highland is sort of the most middle of the road style.